We today starting today we are starting a new chapter. So this is we already covered the introductory part, chapter 1, 2, 3, and we skipped chapter 4. Chapter 4 is an extension to basically chapter 3, the market analysis, how the markets basically tries to answers those fundamental questions in economics: what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce. And in chapter 4 we are bringing some additional market intervention by the government issues such as price floor, price ceiling, and things like that. So you can basically study chapter 4 by your own, and if you have questions you can come back to me, but that's not a part of our evaluation process in this course. In the part 2 we are further extending, so let me write it here. So the part 1, we call it Introduction to Economics. And chapter 1 was basically definitions and basic concepts and classifications basically. So here we did say that economics has two major branches, micro and macro, and economics methodology has two major types of approach, positive versus normative. Okay, and so you basically knew what is economics, dealing with the scarcity, how people makes choices dealing with the scarcity to fulfill their wants. So it's a matter of optimization and things like that, and the efficiency, opportunity cost, we defined it. In chapter 2, basically we brought production possibility frontier, and again we explained the opportunity cost, we explained efficiency, and we explained trade-off. Because we are making a choice, we have trade-off, and in a visual way. All right, so and then in chapter 3 we explained demand and supply analysis. Demand and supply analysis. So how the system works, should we plan for it? Should we plan ahead? This plan should be centralized and done by entirely by the government, or it can be decentralized and each individual and each producers, families do their own self-interest type of maximization and optimization, and ultimately the whole system will be bringing us the highest or the most efficient, optimal level of happiness or satisfaction. So market mechanism is one of the things, we would call it demand and supply, or market mechanism. Free market, that's also free market. And then on the other side, it's the central planning or government directive. There is also a mix of them. So we focused in chapter 3 explaining this. In chapter 4 we give a glimpse of ways that government may actually tap into the actions of the free market like price ceiling, price floor, or taxes or subsidies, things like that, but we didn't cover that. But if you know the demand and supply analysis, so if you have a market consists of buyers and sellers, how the trade is solving those trio questions. So that by trio questions, I refer again trio questions or the fundamental questions. What to produce, how, and for whom. Okay, so we have covered all these things, and now we are going to do in part 2, we call it Introduction to Macroeconomics. Okay, in chapter 5 today, this week, we are going to talk about what are major issues that macroeconomics in macro. So overall performance of an economy is concerned, and there are major issues, and we named them 3 of them. 2 and 3. So it is the growth issue, it is the inflation, and it is unemployment. And in chapter 5 also we put it into context, in the historical context. So we are referring to the 1930s depression and the 1970s crises, related to the oil, and other major issues. So we put in the context that these things sometimes are not gonna be resolved by market mechanism, by free market. Is actually fails. Free market fails to resolve these major problems. So it requires an explanation in a different angle, the macroscopic or holistic approach. So things at aggregate. So we will discuss this in chapter 5. Then so we need some indicators to show them. So in chapter 6 we first discuss how we measure the growth. Okay, measuring growth. So we need something, and we call that something gross domestic product, which is a reflection of aggregate output or income of a country. So this GDP, we say that how we can measure it, that is going to be done, and with the help of GDP then we will measure the growth. And then chapter 7 we will do a little bit of discussions on the other 2 concerns, so inflation and unemployment rate. So we want to give it measure, right? So we are defining a rate which shows how much the inflation is and how much and to what extent they are problems and to what extent they are not. Okay, so by this we will finish the introductory part of macroeconomics. Then in part 3 we start core macro model. Okay, so you have now a better understanding of where we start and where we are heading. So basically, when overall performance of the economy is doing well, then it is easy, everybody finds jobs and the price levels are not a concern, price rise, and everybody is making reasonable good profits if the whole economy is doing excellent. Quite opposite, when the economy is in slump, it means that it's in trouble, it's in downturn. Things becomes problematic, jobs become scarce, many people are seeking job but they don't find, so unemployment is increasing and economy is not growing, the growth of the economy becomes negative and profits are basically taken away, so economy is poorly or badly performing. So these things needs first finding a way to basically score the economy or give it a mark that is it a good economy, is it a bad economy. So with those measurements we do it in part 2 of the book. So in this particular chapter we are giving an overall view of what is macroeconomics all about. And the learning objectives of this chapter are macroeconomic concern, as I told you. So we are gonna define those 3 major macroeconomic problems, growth and unemployment and inflation. And we are telling that how we can basically understand it at macro level. So we need to decompose or say that what are the components of macroeconomy if we want to look at things not from atomistic and microscopic way but at macroscopic way. So we will discuss the circular flow diagram again, which we had it in a linear or circular way in the chapter 1 and 2. And we will bring the government also in that circular flow diagram, and we see that how interactions between the players of a society, producers, consumers, government, and things like that will interact and will resolve the macroeconomic problems or maybe creating it. And in 5.3 we will give a brief history of macroeconomics, starting from the Great Depression and the emergence of the John Maynard Keynes revolution in economics, and ever since we have a course called macroeconomics. Before we did only have economics, and a little bit about the US economy, which is less important, but at the same time it is putting things into the context of one economy, at least the US economy. Okay, so if you remember in the introductory part we said that economics has 2 branches, micro and macro, and micro examines the functioning of individual industries and the behavior of individual decision makers, firms and households, firms as the producers, household as the consumers, and how the utility maximization for the households or profit maximization behavior of firms can be theorized and can be explained. So we develop the theory of production, and then from there we get the supply curve in the market, and from theory of consumption we develop the demand curve, and in the market we put them together. An analysis similar to chapter 3 can help to understand economics or microeconomics. In macroeconomics, things are dealt with economy as a whole, as an aggregate. So it's focuses on the determinants that total national income, deals with aggregates such as aggregate consumption, aggregate investment. We are not talking about the consumption of one family. We are referring to the aggregate consumption of whole Oman, let's say, or investment. And it looks at the price level, not the price of individual commodity, price of car, price of computer, price of gasoline, price of rice. These are microeconomics issues. How about price of everything, price level or price index? Okay, so this is a matter of the macroeconomics issues. And we learned about this in chapter 1 already. So if I give you a multiple choice questions that is this statement related to micro or macro, you would be easily answering it. So the aggregate behavior is the aggregate behavior of household, firms, and governments, and households and firms and governments of other countries. So these are what we mean. Import and export also. In simple microeconomics, we are picking up, we are focusing on only a specific output. So here we put, let's say, a quantity of gasoline and price of gasoline, and we see that how the buyers and sellers of this commodity are interacting, and how the price of gasoline equilibrium and the quantity of gasoline equilibrium will be determined, equilibrium point. So we have thousands of such market, and if a shift in demand takes place because the income is increasing, or the expectations is that future is going to be good, or if the supply may actually change also, then we would both demand and supply over time change, and then we are moving from one equilibrium to another one. So this is S prime, this is basically D prime, and hence we are moving from equilibrium E to equilibrium. So the prices, this can go either this way or this way over time. So dynamic analysis, dynamics of prices, and also quantities also, it is flexible. Prices and equilibrium prices and equilibrium quantities are entirely flexible, and it depends that how the shifts in the demand and supply is taking place, and then you can actually predict it, speculate it, or you may basically face it actually. But in macroeconomics we don't have this issue. We are trying to basically put all outputs here, so aggregate output, and here we put not the only price of gasoline but an index referring to all prices together, whether with reference to specific year, is the prices have increased collectively or overally. So overall price, we call it overall price. So what model we need to explain this, and is the prices at macro level also flexible? So it appears that the prices at macro level are not flexible like microeconomics, and we call it sticky prices. Sticky prices, it means that prices have a tendency to stick to certain level, or maybe they are flexible upward, they may go up, but when it comes to downward they are sticking to that level for several reasons. Not only the goods market, but also in labor market and capital market, especially in labor market. Price of labor is the wage, and the wage can be easily going up because the workers and the companies owners accept increase of the wage, but decrease of it, it's a bit of challenge, okay? So we call them that the prices are sticky prices that do not always adjust rapidly and maintain equality between quantity supplied and quantity demanded. Actually, some part of this is being explained, issues like sticky prices, in chapter 4, but we skipped it. But don't worry, we're gonna explain it in further details in the following chapters. So as I told you, looking at the performance of the economy at macro level, we have issues which the microeconomics never thought about it, or we're thinking that these are not going to be a major issue. If we have thousands of the individual markets and each markets are flexible, and if something happens in one market, it affects another market because goods are complement and substitute. Therefore, we are having a new equilibrium in all other markets. So we have a vector of the prices. Let's say prices. So we have price of commodity 1, price of commodity 2, and price of commodity n, and then we have thousands of this, and they are all in equilibrium and in time t, in time equals 0. And then we move to another year, t equal 1. P becomes, so this is and this becomes P1 1, P1 P2 1, and Pn 1. So they're all flexible because each one has its own market, flexible prices. Same for the quantities. For the quantities, we have a set of quantities. So quantity 1 in time 0, quantity 2 in time 0, and quantity n in time 0. And then here we are going to have, I write it in this side, quantity 1 for the year 1, quantity 2 for the year 1, and quantity n for the year 1. So if these are flexible, the quantities and things are gonna change. So price level or may increase, or decrease. Okay. So if all quantities have increased, then we are going to have a positive growth. So there are three possibilities: that growth is 0, growth is positive, growth is negative. If 0, it means that everyone is getting the same amount of output or income. So that's basically no improvement in the. If you want to know that how performance of the macroeconomic is, so for us is to have more physical outputs for everything and more physical outputs for everything in the future. So this is basically defines the aggregate output. We still haven't been able to define it. In the next chapter we will do that, but there are three possibilities that we would say that if we are growing, it's good, but if we are going downward, actually that's the problem. So problem. We call this negative growth as a recession, and if it's severe, it's become depression. So recession or depression. And if we are doing well, actually we say this is boom, or we are doing expansion. And as opposed to that, the both this recession is also called contraction. So the contraction is bad, and the expansion is basically good. Apart from the output growth, the macroeconomic variable which reflects the aggregate output growth, there are two more indicators which concerns the economy. One is called unemployment, and one is called, it's with the unemployment, if somebody is fired from a factory and he or she goes and find another job somewhere else, this is not a macroeconomic issue. So you may actually quit by your choice, or you're gonna be go under redundancy plans and you will lay off by the company. That may also not be an issue. So in the chapter 7, we are going to talk about these two problems in detail. How do we measure them, and what may be considered as the problem or not, no problem. So unemployment may be low or maybe high. So a red color is showing the problem. If unemployment is low, unemployment rate is low, it's fine. If unemployment is high, like double digit, 10%, 20%, then the economy is in trouble. Inflation also or deflation is the level of this price overall, not price of individuals, the whole thing. So we develop one indicator which shows whether or not the all prices have gone up or has gone down. If it is going up, we call it inflation. If it's going down, we call it deflation. So high inflation is a problem, and low inflation is good. So in macroeconomics, quite different from micro, we are focused on these three major issues. So let me stop it here, and I will record it as the part 2 by going through each and every of these items. Thank you.